And this psalm also tells us that God is found in very unexpected places. Listen to these verses. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even if your hand shall lead me and your right hand shall hold me fast. And we discover in these verses that God is everywhere, even in Sheol. Now, I don't know what your understanding of the Old Testament is, but in the Old Testament, you don't read very much of heaven and hell. Almost unknown. And the concept of hell developed into the intertestament times and wasn't always there in the Old Testament. But when we die, according to the Hebrew thought, we go to a place called Sheol, the dwelling of the dead, gloom and dark. And we discover there, in this place of gloom, this place of death, this place of no feeling, that God is there as well. Now this reminds me of what Marge was talking about last week, that even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, God is there. You ever been to Port Arthur? And it's a miserable place in many ways. You walk through the old jails and you think of the captives who were there and you think of the misery of that place. You're also reminded these days of the terrible massacre that happened in 1996. And the Japanese people who visit there can't understand why we see this as an important place, because it's a place of misery. But we discover that God is there as well. Even though we make our bed in Sheol, God is there. It's interesting. We're celebrating an anniversary of the Holocaust at this time. And many rabbis who were prisoners during that time. Excuse me, another glass of water. Is this the moment to switch over? Even the people who were in the concentration camp, some of the rabbis lost their faith. And they said they saw God going up in the smoke. Others discovered that God was there and that God was a reality, even in a very, very dark place. And many rabbis found themselves closer to God before that. Pardon me. Marge actually subscribes to the electoral lobby, the Christian electoral lobby. And I read some of the literature there. And we discover there that the people who are involved in lobbying the government about certain issues are prepared to go into dark places. Places like euthanasia, places like abortion. And they discover in their writings that God is involved even in those type of places as we try to change the government's mind. Dark places. This could have been written in the time that the temple was destroyed. This could have been written when the Israelites were in exile. And they're discovering that God is there, even in the dark place. Even though I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. And we discover in this psalm too that God is personally concerned about each one of us. Marge and I have been to the Philippines many times in ministering and teaching and so on. And you get off the plane there, and it's a pretty miserable airport, and you walk out through immigration, and you're confronted by millions of people, some waiting for their people to arrive off planes and so on, millions of dark people. And you get in the car and you inch your way through the terrible traffic in Manila, and you're confronted by the fact that every street, every place, every nook and cranny is filled with people. And I remember once getting off that plane and heading in the taxi to where we were going to be teaching, asking myself, how can God be personally concerned about each one of these people? There are millions of them. And when you see that, you ask yourself questions of, are we just members of the animal kingdom? Are we people who live and die? Where is God in all of that? how can he be concerned about each one of us? But in this psalm, we read that God is concerned about each one of us, even from conception. My frame was not hidden from you, verse 15. When I was made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the sea, your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts. How vast is the sum of them. I try to count them. They are more than the sands of the sea. Now, I went through a period of doubt when I got off the plane and saw all these millions of people. But the psalmist sees this as a cause of praise. As he sees the vast numbers in the universe, he knows that God is concerned about each one of us. Actually, when you stop to think about it, when we start sort of just seeing ourselves as a blob, when we start seeing ourselves as members of the animal kingdom, of people who are here one day and gone the next, it's actually blasphemy. Because when we read Genesis, we read that God created us at the very pinnacle of his creation. That we are his personal concern, as 1 Peter says. And when we waste our lives, when we don't use them to honour God, when we look back and we just see time has gone by and nothing has happened, that is, if you like, a form of blasphemy against God. And then, it's strange to read this psalm. Here it is, beautiful thoughts about God knowing us and all this type of thing. And suddenly, the psalmist says, please God, zap the naughty people. Listen to this verse. Oh, that you would kill the wicked, O God, and the bloodthirsty would depart from me. Those who speak of you with malice and lift themselves up against you for evil. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? Do not loathe those who rise against you. I hate them with a perfect hatred. I count them my enemies. Wow! Now, if you've ever been to Wollongong, which Marge and I were up there for 14 years, and it was interesting when you went down the beach. It's a beautiful beach. Great surf rolling in, and you look to the left, and Tarachi's down that way, and towards Sydney, and you see a beautiful beach. But if you look to the right, you see the still waters. Ugly, smelly, dirty things. And this is what this psalm is doing. He's full of beautiful thoughts, but suddenly he looks to the right, and then we come across this ugly thought. I hate those who hate you, and would you please kill the wicked? Now, this is something you find in Psalm, that they're very, very honest. And sometimes I'll read you a bit of Psalm 109. That's a great verse. Listen to what he says. If someone's upset him, the writer, appoint a wicked man against him, let an accuser stand on his right. When he is tried, let him be found guilty. Let his prayer be counted as sin. May his days be few. May another seize his position. May his children be orphans, and his wife a widow. May his children wander about and beg. May they be driven out of the ruins they inhabit. What is that type of stuff doing in the Bible? Well, let me explain. If you go back to the book of Deuteronomy, you've got this, and it doesn't stay this way all the way through the Bible, but you've got this idea, if you sin, you'll be punished. And it's very, very clear, the person who is wicked will get punished. And what the psalmist is saying, this idea is corrected later on in the Bible, but the psalmist is saying, Lord, if that's the way you work, please hurry up and do it. We want the wicked to be zapped. But then he says that. And then there's a cry that says, hey, perhaps I'm one of the wicked. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the path everlasting. And perhaps he's saying, boy, if the wicked are going to get zapped, I need to check myself out and make sure I'm not going to get zapped as well. When you lived in New South Wales, as I said, we did for 14 years, you had to take your vehicles down every year to be checked out before you got your car registered. Well, we had 2 cars, a boat and a caravan. So there were 4 trips a year down to the mechanic, and they used to make a little bit of money out of the fact that they say, oh, you've got a bit of rust in your car, or this needs replacing, or something like that. And you found that some of the things that go wrong with your vehicles actually sneak up on you. In Victoria, it's quite different. Things sneak up on you, and you discover when you're on a country road that something's gone wrong with your car and you've got to pull up. Sometimes we find we just drift into bad habits. Search me, O God, and know my thoughts. Sometimes culture sneaks up and starts taking over our thoughts and our minds, and we discover that we're starting to stray away from what God has wanted for us. I guess as a church we can do that. We can start drifting away from what God actually wants. And we come together in Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and we find that a drift has occurred unless there is a correction happening. How do we get corrected? Well, I've said to you before, I love to read my Bible every morning and ask myself the question, God, what are you saying to me today? And I find in that process there's a correction. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Sometimes when I'm preparing a sermon, I find that if I'm going to say that, I need to start mastering it myself. And I find that God is searching out my heart. I'm married, and sometimes my wife says to me some things that pull me up with a bit of a hole, and search me, O God. Even as we take communion, we're confronted with the beauty and majesty and love of God, and that can be a correction as well. What we're reading here is that God is personal, and he confronts my inadequacies. And it's a beautiful thing. So you see the psalm. What it's saying, let's learn to reflect on who we are and where we are and who we're meant to be. Let's see this as a time when we just stop, pause and reflect and see if there's anything in us that needs to be examined before God. And if there is something that is not right, if there is some failure in our lives, when we come to communion, we come to a time of forgiveness. We come to a time of reflection. We come to a time when we're saying to God, search me and know my heart. And when we do that, we discover that God will check us out, God will correct, and God will modify. Communion time. A time of reflection. A time when we are reminded of who we are and what we're meant to be. A time when we acknowledge the fact that we have failed, and God is a God of forgiveness. We're going to come to communion now. We're going to break bread and we're going to share the cup. And in doing so, we're going to be searched out by God. Thanks.